Hello, my friends. Come closer to the fire. I've got a story for you tonight. A tale so haunting, it'll make you think twice about the depths of human obsession. This is the story of Emma Jangestig, a young woman whose life took a dark, unimaginable turn. Let me take you back. In psychology, they call it Adele syndrome, a strange name for an affliction that has plagued humans for centuries. An obsession so consuming it destroys lives. This term comes from the tragic life of Adele Hugo, daughter of the famous writer Victor Hugo. She was an attractive girl and a talented pianist, but unrequited love had a significant impact on her mental state. In the end, she poisoned not only her own life, but also that of her beloved, stalking him for years, pretending to be his wife, and ultimately destroying his career and personal life. Unfortunately, Adele spent 43 out of her 84 years in a psychiatric hospital. The case of Emma Jangestig in 2008 shocked Europe and became one of the most brutal in the history of Swedish forensic medicine. The case was about to be closed due to lack of evidence, but in court, the truth has been revealed. Emma was born in 1985 in Stockholm, a bright, hopeful child with her whole life ahead of her. She was raised in a simple family with her sister, Katina. At 19, Emma married a young man named Nicholas, with whom she had started dating back in school. Nicholas was a bit older than Emma, and by the time of their wedding, she was already expecting a child. At 20, she gave birth to a son named Max, and a year and a half later, a daughter named Saga. However, despite the birth of two children, the young couple found themselves unprepared for family life and domestic difficulties. They often argued, couldn't find common ground, and soon after the birth of their daughter, they decided that they should part ways. But then the question arose of who would keep the children. Nicholas was eager not only to support the children financially, but also to take an active part in their lives and upbringing. Emma was not against it, but soon she started a new romantic relationship. She moved to a small town called Arboga, located about 150 kilometers from Stockholm, with her new partner and took the children with her. Her ex-husband was against this because he wanted to see his daughter and son every day. The former spouses began meeting repeatedly in court to resolve this issue. Perhaps this time things would be different, but lurking in the shadows was someone who couldn't let go of the past, someone whose obsession would shatter this fragile happiness forever. March 17, 2008, a Monday like any other. Thorny left for work early in the morning. Emma stayed home with Max and Saga. She chatted with her sister online and cooked dinner. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the warm glow of the evening enveloped their little home. She was waiting for Thorny to return, and then everything changed. Around 5:30 in the evening, Emma received a call from Thorny, who warned her that he would be late for work and said they could start dinner without him. After a short phone conversation, Emma continued with her household chores and then sat back down at the computer, continuing to chat with her sister. At 7:07 p.m., their communication was abruptly cut off, literally mid-sentence. Her sister found it very strange, as she saw that Emma was typing her a message, but for some reason never sent it. 5 minutes later, worried Katina called Emma, but she didn't answer. Then she called Tony to find out what had happened. The young man was just returning from work and assured her that everything was fine, and Emma was probably just distracted by the kids and would call as soon as she could. When Thorny approached the door, he was surprised to find it unlocked. Upon entering, he immediately noticed the mess and thought the children had been playing, but then he saw the red stains and the marks on the floor, and with horror realized it was blood. Thorny called out loudly for Emma and the children several times, but no one answered. In the corridor on the floor, he saw a strange object, initially thinking it was a doll, as the figure lay in a completely unnatural pose. However, as he approached, he realized it was Saga, in a pool of her own blood. Her head and face were mutilated beyond recognition. A little further away lay her brother, in a similarly horrific state, with a skull fracture. Their mother was also lying on the floor, covered in blood and in an unnatural position. Her face was severely beaten and disfigured. It seemed that none of them were showing any signs of life. In a state of shock, Tony pulled out his phone with trembling hands and dialed the emergency service number, reporting what had happened.
Verktygsgatan 2B Arboga, 3 personer, Emma blöder jättemycket, 2 barn, Max.
Ta det lite lugnt nu, vart är du någonstans?
Verktygsgatan 2B Arboga.
Vad är det som har hänt där då?
Jag vet inte, 2 barn, 1,5-åring och en, shit, det ser ut som hackhål i. Vad fan är det här? Okej, vänta, jag måste bara lägga ifrån mig telefonen en liten stund.
Ja, jag väntar.
Kom Emma.
Kniv, ja.
Vad fan har hänt? Emma.
Hallå?
Emma.
Hallå, hittar du dem nu eller?
The police and paramedics immediately arrived at the scene and found a weak pulse in all 3 victims, quickly starting resuscitation. No one could understand what kind of monster could do this to a young woman and her children. However, saving their lives was the priority. All the victims were diagnosed with open head injuries. With severe brain damage and extensive blood loss, the doctors did not provide a prognosis, but they did everything possible. Max and Saga were in critical condition. Even if they managed to save their lives, it was unlikely they would be able to breathe independently. Their mother's condition was also assessed as very serious. The young woman was placed in a medically induced coma and connected to life support, hoping that her body would be able to cope while doctors fought for the lives of her children. While forensic experts worked at the scene, trying to find evidence and reconstruct the crime, chaos reigned in the house, with scattered belongings and blood on the floor and walls. The floor where Emma, Max, and Saga lay was literally trampled, and now the medics needed to determine which traces belonged to them and whether there were any fingerprints of the criminal. Surprisingly, the perpetrator dealt with the 3 victims in just 13 minutes. Emma's last message to her sister was sent at 1907, and a call to the police was received at 1920. The brutality with which the criminal dealt with them indicated some personal motive and deep animosity towards the victims. The weapon used in the crime was a blunt and heavy object, presumably a hammer. Nevertheless, nothing of the sort was found, leading to the conclusion that the criminal had taken it with him. From the very beginning, Hellberg was the prime suspect. He was not married to Emmy and was not the father of her children. Therefore, it was assumed that a domestic quarrel between the couple might have escalated into a bloody massacre. The distraught man was immediately interrogated, but he had a solid alibi. Firstly, he had indeed stayed late at work, which was confirmed by his boss and colleagues, and secondly, at the moment of the brutal attack on his loved ones, he was walking down the street and was captured on several surveillance cameras. After the interrogation, the man was released, and by that time, he had already informed his fiancée's family about the tragedy. Emma's parents immediately rushed to Örgryte from Stockholm. They went straight to the hospital to see the victims. But on the way, they heard the terrible news on the radio. Max and Saga had died from their injuries without regaining consciousness. The new suspect was Emma's ex-husband and the father of her children, Nicholas. The couple divorced more than a year ago. They constantly argued, fought over custody of the children, and the man even threatened his ex-wife, which she reported to the police. It seemed that everything was coming together into a single picture. After the breakup, the young woman took the children and moved to another city with her new partner, while their father, having failed to gain custody in court, decided to take a desperate step and, in a fit of rage, dealt with his ex-wife and children. Nicholas was immediately detained, but the man seemed to be devastated by the news of Max and Saga's deaths, crying and constantly asking if there had been some mistake. When he was accused of what had happened, he was initially in shock, and then he started shouting that he would never harm his children, whom he adored. When he was asked where Nicholas was at the time of the crime, he replied that he was in another city. Soon, his alibi was confirmed. The man was indeed 120 miles away from the crime scene when someone was dealing with his ex-wife and children. In search of evidence and fearing for the life of the sole survivor, forensic investigators tried to find any clues, evidence, or traces of the attacker, but the criminal apparently wore gloves and left no fingerprints. With the shoe prints, it was much more difficult, as a dozen doctors had visited the house to provide assistance and carry out the victims. Now, it was necessary to collect all the prints to determine which of them did not belong to the medical staff or the victims. The law enforcement officers themselves feared that the criminal, upon learning that Emma had survived, might sneak into the hospital and finish what he started, as she was a key witness, and if she came to her senses, she would be able to testify. Therefore, Emma's room was under round-the-clock surveillance. At the same time, neighbors were interviewed in search of possible witnesses. One woman recalled that around 5 p.m, a stranger in black clothing was wandering around Emma and Thor's house. She found it strange, but she couldn't see the person's face as it was hidden by a hood. Nevertheless, the neighbor suggested it might be a girl, as the figure was small and fragile. The same figure in black clothing and a hood was captured on a street surveillance camera located in a store just a couple of minutes' walk from the crime scene. But who is this woman, and why would she want to harm Emmy and her children? They decided to show the recording to Thorny and find out his opinion on who this stranger might be and if he has any guesses. From the very first frames, the man's face turned pale, and he said it could be his ex-girlfriend, 31-year-old Christine Schurer. Thorny's ex-girlfriend was born in Hanover, Germany in 1977. When she was still a child, her father left the family and almost completely stopped communicating with his daughter, which negatively affected her psychological state and behavior. The girl grew up with a complex character. In her teenage years, she went to the USA on an exchange program and lived in New York for several years. She received a good education in history and archaeology, traveled a lot around Europe, participating in excavations and expeditions. In the summer of 2006, she went to Greece, to the island of Crete, where she got a job at one of the popular hotels as a tour guide. In July, 26-year-old Thorny came there for a vacation, immediately catching Christina's attention. He also liked this smart, interesting, and educated girl with whom he started a romance from the first days of their acquaintance. At that time, Schurer was 29 years old, but the small age difference did not bother the couple. Their relationship lasted only a week, and after his departure they continued to communicate by phone. A few months later, Christine came to Hellberg in Sweden and literally asked to stay with him. Even then, such behavior seemed overly clingy to Tony. When Christine suggested a trip to the mountains for the weekend, he refused and hoped it would be their last meeting. However, the girl continued to call, write, and insist on new meetings. In January 2007, during a phone call, Thorny told Christina that their relationship was over and they should not see each other again. Christine pretended not to hear this, continuing to call and insisting that he go on vacation with her in the spring of 2007. She came to Sweden again and began to stalk him, trying to convince him to restore their relationship, even though he honestly admitted that he was seeing someone else. Christine said that she had forgotten some things at his place during her previous visit and asked him to get them. Tony agreed, but as soon as they entered the house, she tried to seduce him. After being rejected, she said he would regret it. 3 months later, Christine returned and started apologizing for her behavior. Once again, trying to persuade Thorny to meet, he rejected her. And in the evening, she called saying that she had taken a lot of pills because she didn't want to live without him. Thorny called an ambulance for her and contacted her family, explaining the situation and advising them to see a psychiatrist. After receiving the necessary help in the hospital, her mother took her and placed her in a psychiatric clinic, where she spent more than a month. The treatment did not yield significant results, and the girl remained obsessed with her ex-lover, constantly thinking about how to win him back and making up reasons to meet. In October 2007, Christine Schurer decided to move to Sweden and settled in a suburb of Stockholm, renting an apartment with another girl. She started stalking her ex-boyfriend again, and when she met him, she claimed that she had given birth to his son, but had given the baby up for adoption. Thorny was shocked by the news and wanted to know when it happened, as the last time they were close was over a year ago. They had seen each other 3 more times since then, but Christina had shown no signs of pregnancy. In January 2008, after a dozen unsuccessful attempts to meet with Thorny, Christine wrote him a message informing him that their son had been diagnosed with a certain disease, and now they should go to Germany together to see him. She also added that the child's adoptive father would contact him and provide all the details. At that time, he and Emma were preparing to move into a new house, and Emma was aware of the whole story. She believed that Thorney's ex-girlfriend was just trying to lure him to Germany and that no son existed. When Thorney received a call from a man who introduced himself as the adoptive father of Christine's child, following Emma's advice, he began asking questions about when the boy was born, in which hospital, how it happened, and so on. The interlocutor was clearly irritated, avoiding answers by any means possible, and then simply hung up. Thus, Thorney finally concluded that there was never any son. Christine made up the whole story and asked someone from her acquaintances to play along. The detectives quickly found out where the new suspect lived and went to the specified address. The door was opened by her roommate, who said that Christine had hastily packed her things the day before and said she was leaving to go back to Germany. Now the Swedish police had to turn to their German colleagues for help in arresting Christine. On March 20th, a warrant for her arrest was issued. When the suspect was detained, she claimed that there had been a mistake and that she had no connection to the crime. However, after being brought to Sweden on March 29th, she immediately requested a meeting with a lawyer. Christine's apartment was thoroughly searched. Her phone and laptop were seized for examination. All her belongings were meticulously checked, but no traces of blood were found. Much more interesting findings awaited the detectives in Christine's laptop. It was full of photos of Tony, both together and those where the man was depicted alone or in the company of his new girlfriend. Also, in a separate folder with a very unpleasant label, there were photos of Emma and her children, which the suspect had copied from the social media page. Each photo was signed with offensive, threatening, and simply frightening captions. In the recovered search history, there were queries about how to commit murder without leaving traces, how to hide evidence of the crime, and how to divert suspicion away from oneself. The records also contained a plan of Emma and Thorney's new house and notes indicating when the man left for work, as well as other notes related to the family's daily routine. The interview with survivor Emma took place after her condition stabilized, her vital signs gradually began to improve, and by the end of March, doctors decided to gradually bring her out of the medically induced coma. Upon awakening, she still could not speak. It was clear that she recognized the loved ones present in the room, but she did not understand what had happened to her or how she ended up in the hospital. As soon as the victim recovered a bit and was able to speak clearly, the police decided to talk to her, but did not mention what had happened to the children. It then became clear that Emma did not remember the events of that fateful day and thought she must have been in a car accident. She kept asking about the children and whether they were okay. When Emmy was told what had happened and that her children were no longer alive, she went into hysterics, and the doctors were forced to sedate her, after which she fell asleep. Another month later, Emma, accompanied by medical staff, decided to visit the scene of the incident. Once inside the house, she suddenly remembered everything. The young woman recounted how she had been texting her sister and how the children were playing nearby when she heard a knock at the door. She opened the door and saw a short, dark figure on the threshold, but when she asked what they wanted, she felt a sharp pain, and her vision went dark. A figure entered the house, and the desperate mother, with her last strength, tried to catch up with her to protect the children, but apparently fell in the hallway where they tried to finish her off. Christine continued to stubbornly deny her guilt. The weapon of the crime was never found, and almost all the collected evidence was circumstantial, giving her a high chance of avoiding punishment. However, Christine's neighbor, when questioned, reported that a hammer had gone missing from her tool set in March. She provided the kit itself, and the investigation found that the size and configuration of that brand of tool matched the murder weapon. But this evidence was also circumstantial. Detectives were able to find surveillance camera footage at a suburban bus station where Christine had been 3 times in the week leading up to the crime. She herself could not explain why she visited Arboga so often, but it seems Christine came to watch her future victims. The suspect also could not explain why she searched the internet for information on how to conceal a crime, and why she collected photographs of Emma and her children. On July 29, 2008, Christine's trial began, accused of double murder with particular cruelty, as well as attempted murder. Entering the courtroom, she smiled and began waving her hand in greeting to those present. When she was asked questions about the massacre and shown bloody crime scenes with mutilated bodies, she suddenly laughed. This gave reason to believe that the accused was not in her right mind, but the appointed psychiatric examination established that the girl was sane and fully aware of what was happening. Therefore, she enjoyed what she did and didn't even try to hide it. When Emma was in the courtroom and saw Christine, she fainted. Coming to her senses, she said that she finally remembered everything, and that face was the last thing she saw on that fateful day. In the end, justice was served. Christine was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole, but for Emma, the scars remained. She endured years of recovery, both physical and emotional, and yet through it all, Thorny stayed by her side. In 2010, they married, and together they began to rebuild their lives. That is the story of Emma Jangestig, a story of love, loss, and the unrelenting power of obsession, but also a story of resilience and hope. Remember, it's not the shadows of our past that define us, but the strength with which we rise. Thank you for listening. If you want to hear more stories, follow my channel.